This is to show that even in rocky clay soil, you can get plants to do very well if you give them the moisture and the food that they need. So I'm going to show you my soil unplanted and how nasty it looks, and this is the proof that that's not really the point. I can grow virtually any plant in the soil. I've been here for 9 years and grown so many different types of plants, but as you can see, there's nothing wrong with the health of these plants, and they're all sitting in that same dry soil you're going to look at. And just trying to make the point that what it looks like to you isn't really the point. It has much more to do with the chemistry of the soil than it does with the appearance of the texture and even the color of the soil. I've got a rocky clay that when it is dry, it doesn't look like anything would want to grow in this soil. And that's what I've got. So the chemistry is what it's all about. It's little to do with the texture, although that certainly helps if you get the right stuff. But if you don't have the right stuff texture-wise, it's not the end of the world. You can still mitigate most of the other issues. Hi, this is Jeff Wortham. I wanted to talk to you a minute about soil and the importance of testing your soil so that you can get a great result with your planting. Now, we recommend that people have their soil tested. We send that to a lab and they give us recommendations on how to treat the soil. A lot of my clients, their first question is this really necessary? And we've done literally hundreds and hundreds of these over the years, and they've proven incredibly valuable in trying to determine what's the best way to treat the soil. I'll use myself as an example. After I'd already done these for many years, my soil here at my home needed 2 tests, and the reason is that the backyard had been landscaped for over 20 years and the front yard had junipers in it for over 20 years, had never had any soil preparation, no irrigation, no fertilizing for 20 years. The backyard did have that, and part of what goes into fertilizers, most of them, is sulfur. Sulfur is something that acidifies your soil. Most of us have heard about the pH of soil, and the pH of soil is essentially the balance between sulfur and lime in your soil. And if they're balanced out, you have a neutral pH, or a 7.0 pH is neutral. If you start to fall below 7, that becomes an acid situation, and if you're above 7, that's alkaline. The lab that we work with tries to get the soil into the 7-ish range so that most plants are going to be comfortable in that range, and then if you have plants with certain recommendations in terms of being more acid, then we can treat those specifically. But overall, the goal is to get your soil into that range. So not knowing what your pH is you don't know that, so that's why we have it tested, one of the many reasons. Another reason, which is why I originally started doing this, is I had a beautiful landscape I installed many years ago, and after about 1.5 to 2 years, one particular piece of that was really having a problem. I talked to my brother, who's a commercial landscape contractor, and he said, well, why don't you get the soil tested? We have to have that done on all of our commercial jobs. So I had that done, and there was what's called boron toxicity. And boron is a micronutrient that's in all soil. They actually put it in Miracle-Gro, and it's a necessary thing for plants to thrive. But in high quantities, much like vitamin A for our system, it can be toxic, and that's exactly what we had. It's a very rare condition, but if you have it, there's no way to treat it. The only way to treat it is to not plant there, or to remove the affected soil for the areas that are going to plant if you have an extreme condition. I started testing soil to rule out boron toxicity because it cost my client thousands of dollars to fix the problem after the fact. Then what we found was that following the recommendations for soil preparation, all of the plants were doing much better than other landscapes we were seeing or had done in the past, and that became the reason why we always do soils testing. The thing to also think about is there's lots of little soil testing kits, but they don't really have give you the knowledge or the understanding of all the variables and how they interact with one another to know what should I do. Because you could have one variable that if you didn't have it and you had a deficiency, you would add this. But if this variable shows up, you don't add it that way. You have to account for the variable. That's why we have scientists do this. I took soil science in school. I've done hundreds of these tests. I've read them. And I'm not qualified to really understand fully what should happen each time I see the results on a test. And that's why we send it to a lab. You saw video footage at the beginning of this showing my yard. And again, my results in the front and back were quite different. I had to add 40 pounds of lime to the backyard per 1,000 square feet to raise my pH into the proper range. I only had to have 20 pounds of lime to raise my pH in the front yard. The soils looked identical, but they had very different pH range, and not to mention their chemistry, because the back had been fertilized for years and the front hadn't. So my point being is there's no way to know by looking at soil, and not only that, you're not really qualified, even if you buy one of these little kits, to make a clear recommendation on what should be done once you know what you have. So this is why we send it to the lab, and don't want to beleaguer the point, but I've done this for a living for many years, and I really believe in these tests and why we do them. Secondly, there's an industry standard, at least in Northern California and Central California, for adding 6 yards of compost per 1,000 square feet. If you just want to break this down into dollars and cents, the cost of the report is more than paid for by the waste done if you use the industry standard, which is 6 yards of compost. We've never had a report call for more than 4 yards of compost, even in incredibly infertile soil. 4 yards of compost per 1,000 square feet. So that means at minimum you're wasting 2 yards of compost per 1,000 square feet. That equates to around $150 or more, depending on who's doing your project, of waste per 1,000 square feet. And the more square feet you have, the more you're wasting. It also, they don't know anything about your chemistry, which is what the plant cares about more than the actual amount of organic matter. So understand that you're paying for something that's not necessarily benefiting your plants, and you're not really doing what the plant cares about. And that's another reason to have your soil tested, know where you are, start off on the right foot, and buy your plants a little insurance policy so that they're starting off with the best possible situation before you, when you start them off in their new planting. So that's our thinking behind soils tests, why I highly recommend them. I require it on all my jobs, and sometimes we do 2 or 3, as like in my property, if they're different for different parts of your yard. If there's a reason to think the soils would be meaningfully different, then we would do more than 1 test for those specific areas. And that's soils testing. Please get that done. It's a great benefit to your overall landscape health, and it's one less thing to worry about going wrong once you spend all the time and energy getting your new landscape installed.